You kind of talked about a little bit of a study that's coming up next, but I'm wondering kind of on a larger scale, what are the plans for the next year or 5 years with your testing center? And maybe what are some ways that our board can partner with you or assist in those goals?
Right. So the next year, we will complete this upcoming CHMI study looking at a specific vaccine. We're also preparing for trials subsequent to that. Sean and I have put forth a number of different proposals. One of them looks quite favorable to be done hopefully mid to late next year. So the optimal strategy is to keep this pipeline of studies rich so that we can continue the necessary support for staff and the institutional support that we have for these studies, and also to keep the pipeline not only of studies but of interested participants. When people hear about the success of a study and they hear that this is going on, when they hear from their friends, for example, as Sean mentioned, that there's tremendous rapport between our investigative team and the study participants, and even the participants themselves become a very strong cohort in which they support each other through a study. And we've had some very interesting social dynamics of many of these individual cohorts, people becoming very close friends in the course of these studies. And so it's very important that we continue to maintain that registry of participants, which is something that I think locally, the M.P.H partnership could really contribute to and help us raise the awareness locally of the importance of these efforts and bring more people with interest to participate in our studies.
One of the, in the short term, the vaccines and drugs that we're working on, some of them, one concept is a homegrown Seattle-based concept looking at genetically attenuated parasites, which is work out of Stefan Kappa's lab at Seattle Children's Research Institute. And we've worked with some of those vaccines, and then there will be future versions of that. One of my goals over the next 5 years is to hopefully test a vaccine that grows out of my research group here in Seattle as well. And we're really interested in vaccines that specifically go to the liver, which is where the parasite resides before it ends up in the blood. And we're working on a bunch of concepts using animal models, and we hope to mature at least one of those to be able to be tested in our challenge model. Hopefully in 5 years, we'll see.
Great, that sounds really exciting, and I'm sure that MPI members want to find ways to become involved. So I was wondering, if someone has done one study, are they eligible to do another, or is it kind of a one-time thing?
No, we have participants who have participated in multiple studies. If, for example, they've received a placebo, sometimes it depends on each study's inclusion-exclusion criteria. So there may be studies that are looking for people who have been infected with malaria in the past and would participate in a malaria infection study in the future. This is one concept that Sean and I have been looking at. Or we'll only require people who are malaria naive, having never been exposed or infected to malaria in the past. So each study is unique, and we try to, of course, cater our recruitment efforts to the inclusion-exclusion criteria that are customized for each protocol.
Great. So say if there's someone interested in contributing to your clinical trial center, but isn't eligible for some reason, or maybe isn't comfortable doing a trial, how would you suggest that they become involved?
Well, I'm sure Sean has some ideas here too, but as mentioned earlier, our recruitment effort into the registry is one area that we would benefit from local community involvement. And that is, we have flyers, we have materials that can be distributed at different venues. Typically, the age range, of course, is focused on adults, 18 to 50 or 18 to 65. sometimes the upper end is more limited because even at the young age of 60, myself, the immune system starts to wane a little bit. So typically we're looking for younger individuals, but that doesn't mean that if you're not included, if you're older, you can still help us with this kind of recruitment effort and increased awareness locally in our community.
Yeah, I mean, I think if people were to be in that category, linking to some of our social media links on some of this recruitment material, even just talking about it amongst, casual conversation, I think there's been a lot of discussion of late about the impact of climate change on malaria. We would really like to be shrinking the malaria map, and meanwhile, the Earth is getting warmer, and which is more conducive to mosquitoes. There used to be, this is often a shock to people, in the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 1930s, there was 1 million cases of malaria per year in the United States that caused lots of deaths. I have a beautiful scary map of the state of Illinois where I went to medical school that shows very much a north to south distribution of deaths, with more in the southern part of that state, which is warmer than in the north in Chicago. And that means that, we have potentially the right environment to have malaria. We have a lot of reasons we don't: infrastructure, public health, et cetera. However, this is not a disease that has always just been in faraway places. And I think that's important to remember at this time in particular.
Right. Great. Kind of going in a similar vein, bringing up like endemic diseases that can impact us here. How has COVID-19 impacted your trials and just in the work in general?
Well, of course, the pandemic put a stop to much of the work that we were doing in January of 2020, and we're planning for 2020, and it pushed things into 2021 and perhaps even later for some of our studies. That said, I've taken a tremendous boost from the pandemic with regard to public awareness of the need for vaccines, the need for safe and effective vaccines, and the critical role that civil society and civilians play in contributing to advancing vaccine development. I've also been the executive director of the COVID-19 Prevention Network, and we've had over 650,000 individuals volunteer to participate in our late phase clinical trials. And that mobilization of people, of course, was a result of the pandemic and the severity of an impact on everyone's life. And I think, when something like malaria is endemic to a society, everyone knows how important it is to control that infection. And I think we in the US can sometimes be a little complacent about the severity of and the burden of diseases outside of our borders. Nonetheless, as Sean mentioned, have been within our borders in the past and could be in the future. And so I think we do have a responsibility to contribute to the development of malaria drugs and vaccines, and the interest and enthusiasm and civilian support, civic society support, and the need for them to participate in clinical research has been highlighted by the pandemic. And so we're hoping to, of course, continue the momentum of that interest and apply that to our local Seattle Malaria Clinical Trial Center.
Jim has been a great crusader in the COVID vaccine world, and he's being very modest. We all owe this prevention network a debt of gratitude. I think one of the realities of watching COVID vaccines move forward is as the whole American public waited with bated breath for the outcome of these clinical trials, people really came to understand much more about the development of vaccines, the impact of them. If you can imagine a place that has malaria that kills children every year, and if we think about waiting for the phase 3 studies for COVID, last November, December, everybody was on the tip of everybody's tongue. If those kind of vaccines could save your child from malaria, think about how much excitement that would bring to a community that has had malaria for thousands of years. And the last year really highlights the fact that vaccines are one of the greatest tools in the public health toolkit. It's vaccines, clean water, et cetera. I would just also point out that COVID is likely to increase the number of deaths and cases of things like malaria, because understandably resources in malaria-endemic regions had to be redirected to some degree to deal with COVID, and that's likely to impact HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, other diseases that have been there and will continue to be there.
Right. You've mentioned that you worked with different diseases, HIV and TB, I think, Dr. Kublin, and I'm wondering how your current work can be translated to different diseases or global health issues to kind of incentivize people that this could be impacting them, in their day-to-day, whereas, like you said, currently malaria is not in the United States.
Right, and that's we are trying to build on the enthusiasm and the success from COVID vaccine development to mobilize people's interest in HIV, TB, and malaria vaccine and drug development. And so we are, building on that momentum and continuing that. We've also seen the tremendous success of the mRNA vaccine platforms in COVID-19. And, we have looked at strategies to apply that platform as well as other novel approaches to advance malaria vaccine development. We've looked at that over the past 5-10 years and trying to bring new platforms and new approaches to malaria vaccine development. I think we'll have more success given the advances that we've seen for COVID-19 vaccines. And one of them is the work that Sean is spearheading here in Seattle at the University of Washington. And these novel approaches, I think, are what will likely see ultimately the eradication of this pathogen.
Right. Dr. Murphy, is there anything, or you should move on to the next question? Okay.
No, I don't have anything to add right now.
Great. Well, it's been really exciting to hear about the different types of vaccines that you're exploring. I was wondering, in what ways do you see this hopefully changing how malaria is managed in sub-Saharan Africa as like a absolute goal for the two of you?
It certainly is, and the way both malaria as a disease, as an infection, is managed therapeutically. Some of the drugs that we've looked at here at the Seattle MCTC have helped advance therapeutic interventions and our understanding of how both to test new drugs, but also to further advance existing drugs, or to stop drug development if it looks like one is not looking promising, so that resources can be diverted to other strategies. And similarly, preventive measures, whether it be a drug as a prevention or preventive vaccines, will advance our control and ultimate steps toward eradication of malaria worldwide.
One of the real advantages of our center, the advantages we can provide, is when you try to induce an immune response in the setting of having grown up in an area and having gotten malaria again and again, that may be very different than if you have never seen the parasite. And we are usually working in a setting here in Seattle where the participant has never seen the parasite. So we have a blank slate, essentially a blank canvas to create an immune response on. We're working toward also trying to come up with models where we can have people who have been previously exposed, because it's harder to, the immune response is kind of like a symphony, right? You have all these different parts of the immune system that you would like to do this or that, And to try to get that to all sing together can be more complicated in the setting of someone who's been previously exposed. And so I think that is our next big hurdle, is to how to take vaccines that work in someone who's never been exposed and work to ensure that they will work in all people, exposed or not, male, female, young, old, pregnant women, etc.
That's great. Do you plan on launching any trials where people have been exposed in those areas more in coming years?
So that's a concept that Jim mentioned that we've been trying to develop. The problem with studying the immune system is there are literally 1 million different ways to design the experiment. And so at the moment, this is in the kicking around what is the best way to do that. We keep, working toward better and better vaccine candidates in the what we call immunologically naive model. And so we haven't quite refined the best way to mimic this in Seattle. Of course, we could go to an endemic area and do a conventional study, and those are being done. It's not like this is replacing that, but because we can start and stop the study with such definitive timing, if we could do it here, that would be ideal.
Great. Are there any other exciting things that you want to share for MPI listeners or members? Something exciting that's happening in your organization? I think we've learned a lot. I'm excited. I think I didn't realize that all this work was being done in Seattle. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, we mentioned the study that's upcoming. We have volunteers lined up, but I'm sure we'll need more because many people's schedules may not accommodate being followed, shortly before and shortly after holiday seasons, and people may have travel plans. So, that is always something that, generates a lot of interest when a clinical trial is actually ongoing and volunteers are needed immediately. And we would benefit greatly from the type of engagement and support that I think MPI and the local Rotary could provide.
Great. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, Dr. Murphy and Dr. Kublin. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that our listeners will also enjoy getting to hear more about the work being done and how they can contribute.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.